welcome back to Coaches at Crown Brew Getting Coffee. I'm Kerry Martin, and I've got a second episode here for season 2, and we're excited to be back, and glad you're watching and glad you're listening. I want to thank Swinford Media for this opportunity, and Ross and Abby for being here today. I want to thank Crown Brew, as always, and I want to thank my buddies at Adrenaline Fundraising, Jeff and Matt, for all they do to help raise money for programs, high school, college, junior high, doesn't matter. If you have fundraising needs, Adrenaline Fundraising can really help you. So shout out to those guys and appreciate their support. My guest today is Ron Winemiller, the head basketball coach at Benton High School. They're coming off a historic season where they were state runner-up, and I just feel blessed that he said yes because he's at the top of his game. He's building a great program, one of the best in Southern Illinois, one of the best in the entire state. Ron, welcome.
Thank you, Coach. I appreciate it.
So good to have you. I'm going to run through a couple of things, and then I'll get to some questions. Coach Winemiller, head coach at Benton High School, overall record of 352 and 207. He's 295 and 166 at Benton, 5 regional titles, 1 sectional title, 1 super-sectional title, and doing nothing but getting better. And it doesn't matter who you talk to. It doesn't matter what school you talk to, what sport they coach, or whoever. This guy is so beloved and well respected, and I'm blessed to call him my friend and a guy that I've shared the profession with of coaching, and I'm honored to have you. And again, let's jump right into it.
Let's go.
All right,
ready.
Good. So you grew up in McLeansboro, so tell me a little something about that family, mom, dad, the whole bit.
Yeah, Mom and Dad were both teachers. So, you know, teaching was in the blood a little bit in the profession, and it's my mom has 3 brothers. All 3 of them were in education. So I always tell people when you get together at Christmas, I was either going to go toward it or as far away as I could. So
That's true.
You know, and I have some of my cousins went toward it, and some of them went as far away as they could. But it was something that not only the experience, but the impact that you could see that my parents had on kids and my uncles as well, and the way that they interacted with people and the way people interacted with them. And I think coaching and teaching is such a noble profession in the fact that you get to impact. People see the kids that play on Friday nights and Saturday nights, but it's the kid in class that you have a connection with that maybe no one else does, and maybe you're the only teacher or adult that they have that kind of connection with. So that's what it is for me. And my dad was a driver's ed teacher. My mom was a second grade teacher for 35 years. I tell her mansion's going to be a little bigger than heaven because you do that for 35 years. So it was a great place to grow up. Grew up with great coaches and teachers, and every part of my education was just a wonderful experience.
Yeah, it's almost like you just could not avoid that whole teaching environment around you. And it's so interesting. I love what you're saying about the people. As coaches, we kind of fall under this umbrella. That's our first love, and that's what we do. But it is that classroom experience as well, and those non-playing kids sometimes that touch our hearts and make a difference in our lives as well. And so it's really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's those kids that, and you've experienced it, but to see the kind of season we had, and to see our kids interact with those kids who are non-basketball guys, or not on the team, and to see the excitement that they have and the school spirit and the thing that they bring to the games, and they're talking about the games and how excited they are to go, and that's when it just becomes such an unbelievable cool experience, and to kind of sit back and watch as an adult and say, this is what it's all about.
Yeah, I'm glad that you're able to have that perspective, because I think in the busyness of success sometimes you get so caught up in the games you cannot have that perspective. You can kind of lose sight of that or not appreciate it till it's over. And I love the fact that in the midst of it you're able to say this is pretty special. And you're right, that shared experience unifies so many people in your school and in your community, and it's a really special thing.
And we've been really blessed that our 2 sectional finals that we've played in, we've hosted.
Yeah.
So, I jokingly said in 17 when we played in the 3A sectional final, this is what it's like when the Rolling Stones come to town, because it was a beautiful day and people were grilling out and playing bags, and it was like a college football kind of experience. And then last year it was just that was kind of the game of the state that I think so many people were looking forward to. You know, Central was ranked #1 all year. We were ranked in the top 5 or 6, and I think Joe basketball fan in Central Southern Illinois was looking forward to that game. So it was a lot of fun, but like you said, you get kind of in the midst of it, but you got to take a second to really kind of enjoy it as well.
Yeah, and you regret it if you don't. I'm glad you mentioned that, because it's important to do that. And the longer I coached, the more I appreciated those moments. I love the fact, you know, that it wasn't just either the Benton school, the Benton community. I felt like all of Southern Illinois was rallying behind you, and to see the ball game at SIU, the arena, and just to see a collective Southern Illinois voice cheering you on was pretty cool too.
There were a lot of people. Brad Weathers texted me and he said I had to dig deep to find a maroon shirt to wear to the game. So you know, but it was truly. I told our guys after we beat Central, I said, we're not Benton. We're now the Southern Illinois Rangers, because you see it happen all the time. Southern Illinois is such a great place, and I know many times you probably felt it where people were cheering for you, but I had a friend of mine who his daughter was playing in a junior high volleyball tournament, and he said no one watched the game because everyone was glued to their phone watching the state championship game. So I think that's the kind of excitement that you build, and people, and we had such a good group last year to cheer for. They were such good kids, and they represented the right things, so they were really easy to cheer for.
And let's face it, that makes a big difference too, you know. And when we played in the championship in '96 at Carterville, I felt like I was so thrilled at how all the communities embraced our run. And you're right, we represented Southern Illinois when we went to Bloomington, and that's a special feeling. We tried to convey that to our kids, and I think they bought in. So I love that. And your dad, of course, was a coach. Go ahead and talk about your dad a little bit, and then I'll throw in something that I know about him. But yeah.
Yeah, well, you know, playing for your dad's a little bit of a different dynamic, but it was a good dynamic. I think I learned a lot playing for my dad, that hopefully my kids are now getting to that age where it's getting more competitive. So my dad was great about whatever happened at practice. It didn't transfer over to the dinner table.
Right.
And I really learned a lot from that, and I think it's made me a better husband and father, in the fact that sometimes when you close the car door, it's not been a great day, but when you get inside, those kids, it's not their fault. It's not your wife's fault.
That's right.
And I feel like I've grown in that as I've gotten older, and my wife has been super patient, and there's been times I've gotten a text from her that, take some time, come home when you're ready, you know, because she knows, and she's smart about it. But that's one thing I feel like as I've gotten older and more mature, hopefully I've done a better job of. Now, my kids wouldn't always agree with that, but I think it's something that I have done a much better job with.
And thank the Lord for wives that do understand and have that empathy and understanding, and can say to us, hey, I get it. But also, so they put those guardrails up, and they keep us focused on what really matters in moments where we can get caught up in the moment of coaching, which can be hard. And so I was blessed by a wife doing the same thing, and I know how important that is. Your dad was a football coach. He was football coach at Hamilton County. And am I right, he was co-head coach with Willie Grubb?
Correct.
And when I started coaching at Carterville in 1994, they were still the co-head coaches. And I was glad when those two retired, because I felt like, at the time we played them, they were not as talented as they had been, but they were still so well coached. And you could tell it from the first time I put a film in that Hamilton County, McLeansboro, well-coached football team. And so I didn't get to coach them against him for very many years, but a lot of respect for he and Willie both. And and you had some good seasons. I mean, you said 1992 made the playoffs, and then 93 you just missed on points. So you're a multi-sport guy. What did you play in football? What position?
I played tight end, and I played with a kid that he's probably one of the best running backs to ever play at McLeansboro. His name was Chris Hart. We kind of rode him we were 8-1 my junior year, and that's back when you played on Wednesday. Yeah. And we played 8-1 Casey. So we were both 8-1 before they would bracket it all up and stuff, and so we just knew we were going to draw Marshall. And I mean, you talk about that, it makes you think. I can remember we found out who we played the phone rang, the house phone, which, yes, we had house phones back then.
The landline,
yeah. And I answered the phone, and the guy said, "Is your dad there?" And I said, "Yeah." And I said, "Who are we playing?" And that's how you found out. I was a reporter calling to find out.
That's right.
Calling to talk to my dad about our team. So, it's crazy how technology has evolved all that. And people with their, playoff thoughts and parents. I can remember talking about my dad. He would get the newspaper out, and he would scroll and look for scores and write stuff in. And, but it's amazing that those teams and those teammates and had a lot of those guys show up for our run last year and all the support you get from those guys 25 years later.
And that impacted you, I assume, as a head basketball coach and multi-sport athletes, because you've got a bunch of them at Benton, right? I mean, you share a lot of athletes with Justin Groves as the head football coach and others, and so I'm sure that's had an impact knowing that you were a multi-sport guy and I've got to share, and so there's got to be work the schedules out so the kids aren't in conflict.
Yeah, and I think that's so important. If there's one thing I would say to my younger self, it's you better get the athletes out or you're not going to be as successful as you want to be. And Justin would probably tell you the same thing. There's some of my guys he's got to get out too. So I think that's important. Ever since when I got to Benton, Coach Clawfelder was the head football coach, then Coach Pankey, now Coach Groves. We have been able to work very, very well together. Very seldom do we ever put kids in conflict. And if we do, it's probably a mistake because we really, really try to avoid that and work hard at not doing that because it is important. And kids get 4 years. You want them to have all the best experiences that you can possibly have. And we've had some really good football teams. We've had some good baseball teams, our track team, cross country, so we've had a lot of really good, successful teams at Benton, and I think it's because of the willingness of everyone to kind of come together for the good of the group and share those guys.
Yeah, I think it's a great lesson for all the schools to see the success Benton has had in all the sports, and I think Marion has had a lot of success in a lot of different sports. I think those are the formulas you want to follow, getting all the kids out that you can, get them playing multiple sports, work the schedules out, and understand that, hey, sometimes we got to share kids and sometimes we got to give the kids a break. We can't wear them out in the summertime, and so I love what you're doing. And in basketball, you said your junior year you had a 28-3 season.
We did. We made it to the sectional final. Got beat by Cairo by 2. Tyrone Nesby made a basket at the horn.
Yeah, I remember.
And then the crazy thing about that year, the 4 teams in the sectional that were feeding into the Carbondale Super were all BIT teams.
Oh, wow.
So we'd all played each other in that week, and we were ranked 2 in the state. Pinckneyville was 1, and we both got beat in the sectional final because everyone was kind of looking forward to that Pinckneyville-McLeansboro rematch from the BIT, and we both got upset. And it's a funny thing because you really kind of think when you get to that point, you're like, oh, we'll be back, and even as a coach, you're like, okay, well, we've done, and that's one thing I think about last year. I'm old enough now that I know it doesn't come that easy, and I think about how early in your career you won the state championship. You probably thought, oh, this will happen, this will happen a few more times.
Everybody told me, you'll be back more than, and it never happened again. And got close, but never got on that field again. And so I am glad I appreciated it the way I did, and I didn't buy into, oh, you'll be back, don't worry about it, because I really, really savored it and appreciated it for that moment because it didn't happen again. And it is very fragile, and there's no guarantees, no matter how many kids are back.
Absolutely. You look at some really good teams that take a bad injury late in February, and I mean, sometimes I had a team at Forreston that we were probably a top 15 team in the state. My best athlete, my best player got hurt the last quarter of the playoff football game and wasn't really right all year. Then I had another kid that faced mono in the middle of the year, and he was never right. And then we had another kid that fought a finger injury, just a fluke deal. So you think, well, man, we got all these guys coming back, and then when you start, it can really get away from you pretty quick and not be as good as you hope it's going to be.
It's so true. So you, multi-sport guy, you go to college, you're going to go to SIU. I know that you said you coached basketball at Benton while you were in college, but at the same time, in college you were a manager for the SIU basketball team under
Coach Herrin.
Under Coach Herrin, which is really cool. So tell me about it. Your roommate was Shane Hawkins. Mm-hmm. You're a manager for SIU's basketball team, and Rich Herrin's the head coach. Tell me about that experience with Rich. You've been, you've been around that gymnasium. He's got his name on the outside of it. So now you're coaching with him. What'd you get from Coach Herrin? Where do I begin?
Yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think the big thing I took away from Coach Herrin was he was so good about handling kids and dealing with the different. I mean, you get to SIU at that point, they had Timmons and Lusk and Carr. He had it rolling right then. So to see how he would manage those guys and deal with them, because they were not always the same personality, not always the same person. And I've said this numerous times. Coach would say this all the time. You don't treat them all the same, but you treat them all fairly. And I think that I've taken that as long as I've coached, because I think that's so true. So many kids have so many different backgrounds and so much different stuff they bring with them to practice, or some kids are mom and dad are both there and they're waking them up, and other kids, if they don't wake themselves up and get to practice, they're not going to make it.
So true.
I think that's important to understand when you're dealing with kids, kind of what they're bringing into it, but also there's also a certain expectation that you got to maintain if you want to be part of this team. So I think finding that balance is something Coach Herrin did better than anybody I've ever seen.
Boy, that is such a key thing. And we always talk about this being a master class of coaching, and you've just added something so valuable to it. That balance between being fair and having a standard that's not going to change. But you can't coach every kid the same way, because every kid is different. Their backgrounds are just beautifully said. So when you're done at SIU and you've had this experience under Coach Herrin, you've done your family, you've got an uncle named Dick Korn, kind of a big name in basketball in Southern Illinois and across the state. Your father was a coach. You've got family involved. So you're going to be a head basketball coach. This is your career path, teaching and coaching. You start off your first job was at Zeigler-Royalton?
AC Central.
AC Central. Okay.
AC Central. I worked for a guy named Rod Grimsley,
okay,
who was the assistant to Kenny Crawford for 20 years.
Okay.
So I got the T-Town influence as well a little bit, and see how that went. We had an unbelievable. We lost one game, and we got beat in the regional championship in triple overtime.
Wow. Yeah.
And we had beaten the team that won the sectional 2 weeks before by 15. So I mean, had we gotten over and that's what I'm saying. You think, oh, we're going to be in the sectional. We're the favorite, and then you get upset in the regional finals. So that was a great experience. Then I moved on to be a head coach at Zeigler for a year. That was a great experience at 23 years old. And figured out pretty quick that maybe I wasn't as smart as I thought I was, but then had the chance to move on to Fairfield for a couple years. But I think that year at Zeigler was such a learning experience for me. And I think the one thing I took away from it is I was smart enough to know what I didn't know then, and
that's key.
And you think, oh, I can, they've struggled over the last X number of years. We'll come in and do this. And I've worked with these guys and seen how they have done it. And I will say that those guys at Zeigler, those senior guys, I'm probably closer to them than any group I've ever coached. And every time I see them, man, it doesn't matter where, they all come give me a hug. And I love to see the career paths that they've taken. One of them being the AD at Marion, my man Ryan Gadisky, and some of them are lawyers, and some of them are, it's just great to see them become wonderful husbands and fathers. And I tell Goody all the time, I'm like, man, I didn't have a clue what I was doing. He's like, well, you hit it well. So, but that first group, you just feel such a connection to. And I'm so glad I've been able to maintain it with those guys for all this time.
Yeah, it's awesome. And it's a great part of the coaching is to see what your players and students do post-graduation, beyond the years you have influence on them, and see them do well. That's really cool. And then we talked about after Fairfield, Forreston for a couple of years, and then it's to Marshall County, and you spent 5 years there under a guy named Gus Gillespie. So briefly about that experience under Gus in Marshall County.
Episode 2 would be the 5 years no, it was, I learned so much basketball from Gus.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing about Gus is he just really doesn't portray any sort of arrogance or ego, but he's one of the smartest basketball minds that you could ever sit down and talk to, and to see it every day and what he did and what he was teaching and what he was instilling. It was just an unbelievable. I mean, it was like being in class every day, learning from him and seeing what he did. And the one of the main things I learned from Gus was this. You know, he did not. It was all about the team winning. It was all about the group, from the assistants to the head coach to the kids. In the first game, I remember we were getting ready to walk out on the floor, and he goes, "I didn't bring you down here to sit and eat popcorn." He said, "You're here to coach." So he said, "Don't be sitting there the whole game." So, you know, it was such a great experience, but it was also, and I think you'll know what I mean when I say this, it was time for me to go. It was time for me to spread my wings and go be a head coach. That's the first time. It was the third time I was a head coach, but I was ready.
Yeah.
You know, that was the first time that I was probably really ready and equipped to be a head coach. And I think those other 2 stops were great for me personally to kind of figure it out. But then after spending that time with Gus, and you know, I'll say this, the last game I coached at Marshall with Gus is probably in my 25 years of coaching is the most disappointing loss I've ever had.
Oh, wow.
And, you know, we had a point guard there named Scott McKinney at that time. And back then you played on Monday in the regional semifinals, which the region in Kentucky's, you win that, you go to Rupp Arena. Mm-hmm. So we played Tillman on Monday, and Scott kind of messed up his hand, but we didn't think much about it. And so Tuesday you played the championship, so back to back. And we played Graves County in the championship, and Scott couldn't really dribble a ball. I mean, he had broken his hand. And of course, you know, he wasn't, knowing Scott like you do, he was not going to sit out.
No.
And I'll tell you what, Gus and Janet had just lost Gunner the previous year, and the whole group wanted it so bad for them. And that's one I'll take to my grave with me that I wish we could have given him. But you know, and what I learned something from Scott in that game. After the game, it was no secret that he had a broken hand. I mean, you could tell by watching him play. And he was asked by a reporter, he goes, "Well, did your hand play any point?" We got beat in overtime. So, I mean, it was one of those that just takes the air out of you. And Scott said, "I'll not make any excuses. I didn't play well enough for us to win." And I'm like, man, I don't know as a 17-year-old kid if I could have done that. And so I've always really respected Scott for standing and saying that answer. And like I said, I learned so much from Gus. And, of course, Jana was like a second mother to me. And she let me go. She got me married off, and then she let me go. So they were so good to me and will always be a huge part of my life.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that because he's done amazing things here at Marion and will continue to do so. And Scott's going to be a great head coach someday.
He's about time to spread his wings.
I agree with that. I agree with that. So you end up at Benton in 2009, a storied place for basketball history. You and I talked before filming. We talked about Doug Collins and Rich Youngkus and Billy Smith and Danny Johnson and JoJo Johnson. And I go back to when I student taught there, Matt the Zone Buster Wynn, and you know, and you had a 2024 All-Stater, right? Dr. Tedeschi. And so it just continues. But I remember I was telling you, I would go into that gym after football practice, and it looked like a basketball history museum. The big pictures and the stuff on the walls, and so you stepped into the house that Rich built. When I was there, Ron happened to be there. What was the feeling of that? Stepping into the history of that, was that a little intimidating? Was it exciting? Was it a little bit of both?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big thing was you were removed enough from Coach Herrin's success when I got there. Yeah. He had been gone for 30, 25 years when I got there, and I think it was something about making my own mark. Mm-hmm. Even though we always, and we still do, we celebrate the history. We we embrace it. But you got to go make your own history. You got to go be your own guy, and you can't worry about. And I remember one time, Coach Herrin, he said he was talking to me, and we were kind of commiserating about some things, and he said, nobody cares what I think. Go be your own man, and kind of waved his hand like he used to. And I laughed and I said, Coach, people will care what you think 100 years from now, And he was so good to embrace the program without casting a shadow over it, even though his shadow was always there.
Yeah.
So I think the first step for me was we got to get competitive, because when I got there, Herrin wasn't too far removed from finishing runner-up.
Right.
Murfreesboro was in the middle of their run. Massac, the year before I got there, had just gotten runner-up. Harrisburg's younger guys that were going to be state champs were getting ready to come through. So we were kind of lagging behind those guys a little bit. So the first thing was, what do we got to do to be competitive? And trying to just be competitive with those guys, because you knew if you could compete with them that you had a really good chance to be. My second year, we finished, we may have won 2 or 3 conference games and got away from those guys and won a regional, because we went to the East. So I think that was a big step in our program's development, because it showed our guys that, hey, maybe we're not the most successful, but look who we're playing, and we get away from those guys. So I think that was a huge step in the right direction for us to win that regional in 11.
That's awesome. And then, so the competition itself just made you a better coach, I'm sure. You're going up against some really good basketball programs, really good basketball coaches, Massac and Harrisburg and different places. And that's profound. I heard Joe Paterno one time say, after you have a great season, thank all the coaches you win against, because they helped get you there. One thing about Rich, I think I was about 57 years old. I was getting ready to retire, and Rich, last time I saw Rich, he said, hey, big guy, come here a second. He said, how old are you? And I told him, and he said, oh, you got lots of years ahead of you to go. So he heard I was going to retire, and he's like, are you crazy? You got 20 more years to go. So yeah, I love that. Appreciate you sharing about that. And so you've built the program to a new level now through a number of ways. But I want to talk a little bit about your coaching philosophy. What do you want people to see your team, and what do you want them to say or think immediately when they watch you play?
Well, I hope when they see our team play, they think that these guys are very organized. I think organization, what you do from year to year, game to game, is going to change a little bit schematically, based upon, we don't get to bring our kids in. We have to kind of suit our guys. We've been a 95% man-to-man team. I think this year's team, we may play more zone than we've ever played.
Wow. Yeah.
Just because of our personnel and the people we have. So I think you want to portray that you're very organized, and that your guys understand the plan and understand what's supposed to happen. So I think your philosophy, you've got to have those, we call them non-negotiables in our program. Right. So those things are more about your culture and the way you go about your business every day than I think they ever are schematically. I think a lot of people want to think, oh, well, they do this or they do that, but you got to be rooted in something that everybody's on the same page, and then what you do offensively or defensively will kind of take care of itself if everybody's pulling the rope in the same direction.
Are there moments in the season or out of season that you are purposeful about the culture part of it? I mean, is that everyday thing that you do? You're talking culture, you're talking values, you're talking goals, you're talking vision for the program. Is that something you set aside time for? Or is that an everyday thing?
I think it's a little bit of both. I'm a big believer in guys that, and this, you hear a new coach get hired at a Division I, the first thing he starts preaching about is the culture. And I think high school kids, you can't fool them, as you know.
No.
They see how you operate, So if I'm preaching to my kids about being a good father, and then they see me interact with my kids and it's not a good scenario time after time, then they're going to be like, he's just those are just words, But I think it's living the things that you speak on, and making sure that those guys see that. And my wife teaches at the school. So they see me every day interact with my wife. They see me interact with my kids. A big thing with us is time. we operate pretty much on time, and they know that, and they support that and understand that that happens. So I think more than just talking about, hey, we're going to do some culture stuff, I think they see how you live it out in your everyday life.
Let me ask you this. So having said that, and I love that idea of you can't fool the kids. They're going to see through it. You got to be genuine. You got to be honest about who you are, and you got to live that. Let's talk a little bit about kind of the lightning round of some things going on in basketball right now. Okay, so I get asked this question a lot about how the three-point shot has changed the game. Has it made the game better? Has it made the game worse? Where do you stand on that?
It's made the game way different.
Way different. Okay, good answer.
I just think because you go back and watch some of those games from the 70s, those teams are pounding it in the post every time, and it was. And I think more than what the three-point line has done and the way that the game is officiated, it's so much more physical.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, you look at our semifinal game with us and Byron. I mean, those are two big, strong teams beating on each other, and that was one thing I worried about with our team is we had played T-Town and Breeze Central and now play Byron. I was worried about us just being tired because the games were so physical. So I think the game's more physical, and I think that three-point line has allowed people to kind of stretch out. It's just such a different game than it was pre-three-point line.
You talked about the foul reset.
Yeah.
So at the end of the quarter, there's a foul reset, and that's something you advocated for.
1,000%. I've been in favor of that for the last 10 years. And here's why. Because if you go to a game and the foul doesn't reset and all of a sudden it becomes a free throw parade, guess what the officials stop doing? They stop calling fouls because they don't want to be there all night.
Yeah.
And now it gets more chippy and it gets more physical. Now with that reset, it just allows, I think, a freer flowing game. And those officials have such a tough job anyway. Yeah. So I think it's made their job a little bit easier to be able to reset those fouls. I think it's a really, really good rule change.
I love it. You talked about the shot clock. So tell me about that. It's coming, right? In some form already, but it's not a permanent thing yet.
No, I think we're not playing with it this. I get confused, Coach. We're not playing with it this year and 2 years. I think in 2 years we're going to play with it in the postseason.
Are in favor of it? Not in favor of it?
I'm in favor of it from this standpoint. I think it's going to force me as a coach to really reevaluate a lot of things that we do. Because you're going to play the end of game scenarios so much different. Okay. Because now you're down by one with 45 seconds, you're fouling. Well, now with a 35-second shot clock, maybe you play it out, and now you're going to get the ball.
Right,
so
that's true.
I think those end of games, when you get to a certain second on the clock, you go start thinking 2-for-1s, and the kind of things you talk about in the NBA and college basketball. And it's probably a bigger deal for us because we have 4 quarters and they only have 2 halves in college. So they don't deal with it near as much. But I do think the one misconception is I think a lot of people think when the shot clock comes in, now we're going to play 75, 72 games. I don't necessarily think that's going to be the case. I just think it's going to change the last 90 seconds of a quarter more so than I think it's going to allow a lot more possessions. They chart that every year at the state tournament, and they said last year in the 2A state tournament there would have been like 4 violations only. Oh, okay. So people think it's going to it's really not going to change the way the game's played as a whole. It's just going to change that last 60 seconds of the game. That's
an awesome perspective. Basketball is a long season. It seems like football season goes really fast. I don't know if it's the start of school or it's only 9 weeks regular season, but basketball starts in one year and ends in another, which makes it sound longer because you don't have a 2009 season. You have 2009-2010 season like your first at Benton. How do you avoid the burnout phase? How do you get your kids to peak? Because obviously you're doing that. You're getting them to peak at the right time. Is there anything you do to help that, so you don't peak at the wrong time?
Well, I think something you and I were talking about before we started filming. You do something one year and it works great, and then you come back and do the same thing the next year and it doesn't work as well. But I will say last year something we did and something we'll do again this year, because we thought we had a really good team and hoped to be playing deeper into the postseason, we gave our kids some more days off in the front end than what we normally do. So we took For instance, we played on the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. We took Wednesday and Thursday off, which we never would have done in the past,
Yeah.
you know. So we were intentional in the beginning. You know, you mentioned my uncle. I called him after we won the Super-Sectional, and I said, okay,
Yeah.
what do I need to do?
Yeah.
And he said, he goes, rest. He said, I remember, I can still hear it in my head. He goes, you can't win the state tournament today, but you can lose it if you do too much.
That's great, yeah.
So
That's great.
I think that's something, as I've gotten older, I've paid way more attention to. And you've got those guys on your team that you see them in school. Hey, how you feeling today? You know, Coach, my legs hurt.
Yeah.
You know, my legs are heavy. And then you ask another guy the same thing, and you're getting the same answer. Okay, we need to back it up on them a little bit. So I think I've learned to trust my kids a little more on that, because before I would have said, you know, you need to get tougher. We're not in very good shape, you know. But I think that's one thing, is saving your legs, because when you lose those legs in February, it can go downhill pretty quick.
I worked in days of recovery during my football week, which I had never done before. At the end of my career, I was trying to find a day of recovery like Wednesday, and we backed things off. And it was not an easy thing for me to do, because that was kind of against my nature. I was always an up-tempo, go hard, go fast. And I had these Wednesday recovery days, which I think really helped my team in the postseason. I had John Helmick one time, great football coach, Southern Illinois, one time told me, a well-managed or well-timed day off, it could be better than an average practice where you're going hard, and let your kids recover. And Gus is great at that, by the way. And I started leaning on it a little bit, watching Gus give his kids a day off, and I'm thinking, why aren't they practicing? But it was strategically planned to keep his kids fresh near the end of the season. And I'd love to hear that, because I think you're right. You have to trust yourself a little bit on that, because that is not in our nature. We never want to be under-prepared. We want to over-prepare, if anything else. And giving kids a day off, you kind of wonder, was that the right thing? But I do believe in it now.
And I think the other thing I used to do a lot early in my career that I've completely cut out was, hey, we're going to come in and shoot for 30 minutes. Well, guess what? The kids still have to come in and get dressed.
That's right.
And I think there's a lot, and maybe this is silly, but I think there's a lot for them psychologically. When that bell rings at 2:50 and they can walk out with their buddies to their car, I think that does a lot for them mentally and prepares them. And guess what? There's been very few times that we've given our guys a day off that they don't come back in the gym and they're really good the next day. Yeah. And I think a lot of it has to do with the mental as much as the physical.
I think I 100% agree. Well said. And I want to kind of talk about this real quick, and something that alludes to your program. I got invited to speak at your banquet a couple of years ago, and of course, I know the history of Benton's basketball, and I knew it was, you know, an honor, first of all, to be asked, and that's not why I'm telling the story, but I want to say this. I got there, and I went and ate with you beforehand, and then I looked at the list of people who had spoke at that banquet in the past, and it was an intimidating list of who's who, and I was so honored. It was so well done. It was an awesome experience from everyone involved, and just wanted to tell you again, thank you for that opportunity, because I was blessed by that experience that night. And you guys do things the right way, and I thought that was just a snapshot of what makes your program really special.
Well, and it's something that's, I think this was the 65th year that it's been, the Methodist Church has put that on for the boys basketball team. And like you said, you sit down and look at that placemat of all those speakers, and you're like, man, there's been some really good people do this. And Coach Kerry Martin definitely in that list, because you did a great job. But I think this is what I said numerous times last year during our postseason run. There's nothing like a winning sports program in a little town to make you appreciate it. And I told my assistants, we were on the back of the fire truck after we won the Super-Sectional, and I said, I would give every amount of money in my bank account right now if somebody had a drone above the square with a picture, because I would hang it in my office. Because I mean, it was just, they were 4 or 5 deep. Everyone was, and people that are listening to this get it, because they're probably involved in education and coaching. You don't understand the happiness it brings to the people in town until you see it. and just the pride that they feel when they get to experience something like that. And Jim Muir told me, he said, grown men wept, because there were a lot of guys, and he said, myself included, who didn't know if we'd ever see Benton in the state championship game. So I think a lot of people understand that, and like you said, I think I was at an age where I took it all in and really enjoyed it, and that's what made it so exciting and just meaningful for me.
I think in a very divided world, sports can be a unifier, and we've never needed it more than we need it right now. And those moments where religion and politics and all that stuff gets thrown aside, and we're just Benton Ranger fans or Marion Wildcat fans or Carterville Lion, doesn't matter, whatever it is, it's unifying, and it's a special thing. And I just appreciate everything you've done and what you continue to do. I know there's no predictions. We talked about everything's fragile, but you do have a good group coming back.
We do. We lost 3 really good players. Isaac Billington was an all-stater for us. He's playing at SIU now. Evan Munoz started for us. He's playing at Culver Stockton. And Luke Melvin, who's playing golf at John A. Logan, who's off to a great start. Luke is with the golf team at Logan. So those 3 guys will be tough to replace. Yeah. We returned 2 starters. You got a good place to start with Doc coming back. Yeah. And then Grant Owens. Grant played so well. He was kind of the guy that a little bit forgotten for us last year, but had a huge steal to win the game against Breeze Central. And Kyle Thomas, when Luke got hurt in the state semifinal, started in the state championship game. I told him, I said, "You're the answer to a trivia question, dude. 1 career start in the state championship game." Yeah. So we bring those guys back. Also excited to bring back Nolan Schaefer, who played a lot for us off the bench. Trey Severin's another senior who was hurt up through Christmas last year, and we saw some good things from him in the summer. Jackson Zettler's another senior that we got coming back. And then we have a kid named Jackson Wiggs, who's a sophomore that we really like. So we feel like we got a good blend of old and new. A lot of things that this group won't do as well as last year's group, but I think there's some things we do better too. Yeah. So I'm excited about trying to figure that out. And the one thing I would say is, and you were a head coach for a long time, I got the best assistants in the world, and I've been blessed. Since I've been at Benton, Jason Hobbs has been right by my side the whole time, and he's basically, I call him the voice of reason. He knows what needs to be said to me and to the kids, and then Andy Sloan's with me now, and he's been a head coach. He has that head coach mindset, which is so important to have another guy that's thinking about the same things that you are over there on the bench. And then we have Lucas Roberts, who takes care of all those detail things and does all our out of bounds. And Scott Page is our post player coach, and Tim Korn was with us last year. And so we've been so blessed with those guys, and it makes my job so much easier. Yeah. Especially when you get to a situation like we were last year at the state tournament, all the logistics and those guys are able to take care of so much of it for you. So I've just been really blessed, and I had Wade with me for 7 years, and just been. Those guys just and I think this is what you asked about Gus earlier. I think this is what I did with Gus. I challenged him. Things weren't always roses and sunshine for those 5 years when I was with him, but I think we challenged each other, and I think that's what my assistants do with me now, and I think that's what they do for each other, and I think that's one of the big reasons why I've had so much success.
I love it. I said many times, outside of my family, the greatest blessing I have is the Lord surrounded me with great coaches. Everywhere I went, they were there, and I needed that, and I didn't do anything. We did stuff as a collective group, players, coaches, families, and coaching staff. Man, it matters, and it is truly a blessing, and it's cool that I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I know personally what it means to have good people by your side, and to be strong maybe where you're not so strong, and be that voice of reason like you said. So I appreciate that. And I speak briefly about your family. I don't want to leave your family out. Wife and kids? Yeah,
my wife Whitney, and I would say the same thing about my assistants. They all have great wives that allow them, sometimes it's people understand the season, but they don't understand the summer and all the other stuff.
Right.
So yeah, I've been married for 15 years. I got hired in May at Benton, got married in July, and then so we basically hired, moved everything, and have 2 children, two daughters, Mason and Malone. Mason just turned 13, and Malone will be 10 in November. And I said this too. I'm so glad my kids were the age that they were when and got to experience this. And you try to do it for so long, and then to have them at the age that they were, to be able to experience it and all the cool stuff that goes along with it, is something that was really cool. But my little one, we were suffering through a season that wasn't quite like last year. About 3 or 4 years ago, she was probably 5 or 6, and she goes, Dad, it sure would be nice to ride the fire truck around the square. I said, you're telling me? She goes, maybe if we brought a new guy in, he could. So
no.
I'm like, okay.
Wow.
So the pressure's on. Yeah, the pressure's on.
Yeah. Well, sometimes kids just speak their mind, and sometimes it's a harsh truth.
Yeah.
But that's awesome. I'm happy for you, man. You've earned this, and your resume speaks to a lot of great influences. But you had to listen, and you had to learn, and you did, and then when the time was right, you're a perfect fit for Benton, and I think that's I look forward to watching you continue success in what you do, and you do it the right way, Ron. You are kid first, player second, and I'm proud to call you my friend and in this business, fellow coach, and I wish you all the best, man.
I appreciate that. And I think one of the things I did when I was a young guy is from afar, not necessarily, I got to see how you did things. And I Coach Martin at DuQuoin, you watch those football, Coach Helmick, you mentioned him, all those football teams, and then you started watching Dick Korn's teams and Kurt Reed's teams and Joe Haas. They all had the same thing. They all had grit and toughness. And to be able to see how those guys, but you got to be your own person.
Yes,
That's the one thing I would say is you can't be someone else. Kerry Martin's a great coach, but I can't be Kerry Martin. I got to be me. And same thing with guys you work for. You still got to go be your own person. And I can't tell you how honored I am to sit here and do this with you, because I think so highly of you and the job that you do, not only as a coach but as a person. And I'm really excited that we were able to do this.
This was great. Awesome, man. Thank you so much for sharing and being open and willing to do this. I want to thank Abby and Ross for all they do with Swinford Media, Crown Brew for even letting us go over a little past closing time and use this facility to have a talk about coaching. And don't forget about Adrenaline Fundraising if you have fundraising needs. And I appreciate you watching. I appreciate you listening, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you.